Yo,
The New York Times
morning, afternoon, good night.
Trump actually led
It's all that. No matter what, somewhere it is. So that's why I say that. Anyway, hurricane won't leak or high gravity, 8.1 in an aluminum can, 25 ounce big one.
Georgia, Michigan, Nevada,
I got some pork loin. I just pulled out on a plate
this time.
with some mustard.
Biden team look at that trend.
Let's try this.
How are they going to tackle that?
Well, I was talking to people today from the Biden universe, and they say, yeah, things are stuck. That the polls really haven't moved. They are not. They're not freaking out about it. They believe that they have an entire campaign to run. I think that if we're looking at polls that look like that,
Martha Stewart did time, so it's Trump.
But right now, we're 6 months out. They insist, and based on conversations I've had with voters,
he wasn't a president.
Although
he was a Hitler.
Like a lot has happened, and there's been so much politics happening. People who don't want to think about politics also happen to be undecided voters.
Everybody's got to think about politics.
And people who may not be likely voters, but who might get picked up in polls. And those people are just not following every twist and turn. They aren't following every single economic indicator, and they're also not following this.
Follow me to the desert.
Biden campaign has spent a lot of money on ads. It seems like a lot, but compared to what they're going to spend, it is minuscule.
And how do you look at that trend over those last 6 months? The trend that hasn't changed.
Right. It's a race that, again, we feel like this race has been going on forever. Most regular voters aren't going to start really tuning in until we get to the fall. One thing that is notable in these polls, the reason people are talking about these polls specifically is because these aren't national polls. These are the polls of the states. This is how you get elected president, right? You can win the popular vote. We've learned this a couple times now. You can win the popular vote. You got to win this 270 electoral votes to win presidency. And what we're seeing, and this is really the thing that we're going to be watching over time when we talk about trends, is the real erosion of support from Biden among voters of color. And this is the reason that he's doing worse. Biden is doing worse in places like Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, where voters of color, especially Hispanic and African-American, make up such a significant share of the vote. In a state like Wisconsin, which is overwhelmingly white, there's not been much movement against Biden now. So that's the question. Can Trump really hit these, in some cases, high for a Republican among some of these groups? Are we seeing a
really want to have that fucking guy?
Or is this a moment in time, as Tam said, where
fucking
you have a lot of people who are kind of checked out, who are disappointed in both candidates, especially disappointed, as the woman in Lisa's piece pointed out. Here she is. She said she's voting for Joe Biden, but not enthusiastically.
On the same point of younger voters and their movement away from President Biden, though, many of them are the ones who are driving some of the protest vote, the uncommitted votes we saw during the primary season. How is that issue? How do you see that playing out, especially given the fact that Mr. Biden has now turned towards some tougher language, saying he could withhold some weapons from Israel and how they're conducting.
Anyway, I'm fucking burnt out, man.
Well, it's unclear because at this point, and Tam brought up a really good point about the campaign getting engaged and what the Biden campaign is doing. In this poll that we just were talking about, the New York Times poll, when they asked voters, who do you think is doing a better job on the conflict or would do a better job? Donald Trump was leading by almost 15 points. Now, what the Biden campaign would say is, do these voters know what Trump's position on this issue, especially if you were supportive of the Palestinian side of the fact that Donald Trump has been a very close ally of Netanyahu's, probably not something that they know at this point. How do you look at that?
Well, and just to add to that, on TikTok and various other social media platforms, there's a lot of talk about, well, under Donald Trump, there were no wars. Everything was fine. Under Joe Biden, there are wars. Now, we can fact check the bejesus out of that, but we won't. But because that perception is out there, particularly among young voters, that can also feed into this. More broadly, I would say that there was this Harvard youth poll that oversamples young people. It's a poll of people under 30 years old, and it asked what their top issues are in this election, and pitted different issues against each other, and ranked them based on which which issues come up at the top. It's the economy. It's the cost of living. Yeah. It's student loans and guns, and then you go down to like number 14. You go way down on the list, and that's where you get Gaza as a voting issue. Oh, the reality is that people are complicated. They have a lot of things that they care about, and there are some people who care very passionately about what's happening in Gaza. There are a lot of people who care a bit, but care more about other things. And I'm not saying that President Biden is actually doing particularly well among people who care a lot about the economy or the cost.
Well, you can only do so much.
Kevin, to stick with you on this,
people
you mentioned the trial of Donald Trump that continues,
but not Trump.
in New York.
Putin, fuck those guys.
Earlier in the show, we have seen Mr. Trump continually come out.
Maybe Trump, he can go be a fucking Russian autocrat.
Especially undermining the judicial system. It feeds his narrative, right? But is he also preparing voters for a possible guilty verdict here?
He has been preparing certainly his voters, his base, to distrust anything that he says to distrust. And he is shouting loud and clear, distrust this process. Don't trust that jury. They're liberals. Don't trust the prosecutor. Don't trust the judge. So there's a lot of that out there. You know, the bigger question is how much this is going to register. The trial hasn't really changed anything. Will a verdict change things?
Well, because there's been nothing really new, I think, that has come out of this trial that at least people who've been following it closely would say this is new information that that we're getting. I don't know. I think voters, if there is a conviction, it may take a while for it to actually sort of seep into the way they think about voting in this election. Right now, it is a proof point, or it's a data point. Again, and 6 months away, and it's right now, especially it's a hypothetical. But let's say there is a conviction. As we get closer to the election,
there fucking better be.
Becomes how much does the Biden campaign lean into that issue? Right now, they've been very, very quiet about this. And who gets to set the narrative about what this is? Right now, Donald Trump is setting the narrative about this trial. It's corrupt. It's unfair. It's political. There's not been a whole lot of narrative from the other side, certainly not from the Biden campaign, but not from Democrats either.
And I think it's notable that this may well be the last trial that former President Trump faces before people start voting.
Tamara Keith, Amy Walter, always good to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I figured out nothing, but just we're having some dialogue.
FBI field offices across the country have reported an increase in youth sextortion cases where sexually explicit content is used as blackmail. Stephanie Sy reports on the concerning trend and preventive efforts to protect minors.
Social media has become fertile ground for scammers to target young people, and in some cases, the consequences have been deadly. In a 2-year period between October 2021 to March 2023, the FBI received over 13,000 reports of online financial sextortion of minors. It impacted 12,600 victims and led to at least 20 suicides. FBI Special Agent Emily Steele joins us from the Phoenix field office with more on what the dangers of sextortion are and what parents can do to prevent it. Agent Steele, thank you so much for joining the News Hour.
Oh, man.
First of all, give me a sense of how prevalent this crime has become and why the FBI is especially concerned about young people.
This crime has become significantly more prevalent, especially with younger children's access to technology. So whether it be receiving an iPad or a Chromebook from school that has internet connection, or even just availability of getting on a parent's phone and using social media. Kids are learning younger and younger how to navigate through the internet and online social media world, and that's creating more victims for predators.
This is how it goes.
Social media.
On to the next big hunk of fucking meat. That's bigger than my brain.
Platforms. How does it work?
You know, you described it a long or short process, but the short process is children are vulnerable and children are everywhere online and not using proper security techniques on their social media. So say, for instance, they have an Instagram, it's not set to private and anyone can follow them and see what they're doing on their day-to-day activity. So if a child posts on their Instagram story, for instance, that they're in school and they're taking pictures with their friends, well, then a predator instantly knows that this is a minor because they are in school. From there, it can be as easy as sending a direct message and complimenting the minor, or pretending to be a minor from the opposite sex and asking for new photos.
Yeah, I'm Santa Claus. Okay.
Very quickly. It's not a long process or a long drawn out relationship. It can happen in a matter of minutes that they are convincing these children to send nude or explicit photos and videos of themselves.
Because you're an adult that's pretending to be a child, and there's no way for the kids to know that, and then they get the kids to send some sort of nude compromising photo to them, and then
there are two situations that can happen. I like to kind of separate two different sex orders. The first one is going to be the money-hungry sex order. Typically, that's going to be an individual from overseas. A lot of Africans, specifically coming out of Nigeria, that there are these huge schemes to target children because they're scared. So once an individual receives a nude photo, they then tell the child that, hey, I'm not who you thought I was. You better send me $50 or I'm going to send this photo to everyone on your followers. And what this individual has done is they have already screenshotted who this kid is following. So it doesn't even matter if the kid blocks them, they still have access to all that. So that's kind of the first type of predator who, if they can do this to 10 kids and 5 of those 10 kids send them $50, it's a pretty easy payday for them. The other side of it is an individual who's asking for this type of content simply because it's a child. So that's who they are attracted to children. They are attracted to that type of content, and is not just a get rich quick scheme. So it's two very different mindsets, but both of those categories fall under sextortion.
Damn Trump.
Is it boys and girls, Agent Steele, being equally targeted? Are there certain age groups they're targeting?
So it is both boys and girls. We have seen a rise in the amount of male or boy victims in the last few years, but it is still largely female. And typically what we're seeing is boys, the ages are between 14 and 17, and girls are a little younger. The female victims we're seeing anywhere from 12 to 17, and I've had a victim as young as 7 be targeted for sextortion. So it can really be any minor that has access to the internet, but it is both boys and girls.
And you mentioned Instagram. What are the other platforms that people need to be aware of? And is it also true that sometimes the predators can get to kids via games such as Roblox?
Yes, so Roblox is one of the major platforms that we see victims come from. Actually, my 7-year-old victim that started on Roblox, and the individual was paying this 7-year-old in Robux to send him on Snapchat. So you have Roblox, you have Snapchat, you have Instagram, and then Discord. Discord is also a big one. Discord is an application on the phone, or you can access it from just a regular computer. And it is big in the gaming world. A lot of them like to get on Discord and get in these gaming rooms to talk about the game. These predators know that these kids do this, and they will jump into these rooms and catch them that way as well.
I know that you yourself, as an FBI special agent, have been going out to schools to try to educate students. What is the one most tangible thing that a parent or educator can do to protect their kids from this?
Specifically on the parent side,
don't have internet.
I always say the parent pays for the phone. You should know what is on that phone. And that includes knowing the PIN to the phone, as well as knowing the passwords for accounts. If the child is starting to act off or weird or extremely attached to their phone and they can't leave it for even a second, it's not a bad idea to be able to go in and see what's going on, see what is on their phone that they are so scared to leave behind. So I think if I had to pick just one measure to take, it would be having access to your children.
Shut your internet off.
What applications do they
have? You don't need it.
Do they have Snapchat? Do they have Instagram?
We do not need internet to know pleasure. We do not need Jesus to know love.
Office of the FBI. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What we need is Malika. Science. We should go back to bloodletting.
Unfinished love story.
Because it really works.
Story of the love of two people for one another, and
you let more blood out.
The new book.
Let it all out.
They're well known to NewsHour audience.
Put Malika back in.
Kearns Goodwin. She spoke recently.
That's where they got it wrong.
For our arts and culture series, Canvas.
in the past, region, ideology.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, presidential historian and commentator extraordinaire. For years, bringing the past into the present on the NewsHour, where I first got to know her, and other news programs.
Doris Kearns Goodwin.
A delightful and delighted presence late night.
The teacher's Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Today we explore Lincoln's 18th
And that mark of true celebrity on The Simpsons.
fried macaroni and pipe cleaners.
Most of all, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of best-selling biographies of Lyndon Johnson, Teddy and Franklin Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln. Presidents she's thought of as my guys, alive for her through research and writing.
My kids remember when I was in the room once, they heard me talking to Franklin and Eleanor and wanting them to get closer to each other. They wondered what is going on in that room. I couldn't get any answers from those guys, but now this was my guy.
This was your guy.
This was my guy, 42 years.
Her latest subject, her real guy, Richard Dick Goodwin, who as a young man was near the center of political triumphs and tragedies in the 1960s. A speechwriter and advisor to John F. Kennedy, with his promise of a new frontier and a call on young people to help change the world. To Lyndon Johnson, helping name and shape the Great Society social programs to fight poverty and discrimination. And to Robert F. Kennedy, before he was gunned down while campaigning for the presidency in 1968. When Dick Goodwin turned 80, he decided it was finally time to look at the hundreds of boxes of documents and memorabilia he'd saved from that time and write of those years. And he and Doris took on their final project together. Partway in 2018, Goodwin died after a brief bout with cancer.
I was helping him in those first years to write a book in his voice. And then when he died, I had to figure out what to do. And we had gone through many of the boxes, but there was much more left to be done.
I'm gonna go through some boxes one of these fucking days.
That I needed to keep the promise
Or the
I made,
best.
and I'd finish it. It had to be in my voice, not
New World.
It had to be an historian as well as a biographer of him, and it had to be about the 1960s as well as our personal lives.
The result, an unfinished love story, part history of a political era, part tale of a long and loving marriage.
It's a good book out there.
One key figure they shared, though not at the same time, Lyndon Johnson. Dick Goodwin had come to believe that LBJ's continuation of the Vietnam War derailed much of the good achieved in domestic programs.
It's called Diamonds and Diplomats.
He left the White House in 1965 and went on to work with Johnson's political nemesis, Robert
JFK.
Kennedy. For her part, Doris worked directly with LBJ in his final period
secretary
and later assisted him with his memoirs. Husband and wife had argued for decades about
She wrote a book, Diamonds and
history and in their own lives.
Her name was
The boxes led to a kind of unexpected and again deeply personal
Diamonds and Diplomats.
Going through the Selma part of it, he went upstairs and he said,
"Oh man, what's her name?
The old guy again."
I'm spacing
it
it
really
out.
killed him in those last years of his life. There was something about going through the boxes that, for me, I felt as long as we had more boxes to go through, that he'd keep on living and we'd have our story together.
Right, it's a great book. I just happened to come across it when I was dating this girl down in Aqua.
And I remember he one time said,
I love her giving books away, and I was bored. I love reading. I read a lot of
but
books.
it gave him a sense
I found that one, and
joy of waking up in the morning. And more importantly,
it's a lady who was secretary for JFK.
What LBJ had done, what the Great Society had done, was permanent. So that there had been achievement to be proud of. And he didn't have to feel.
She was a French secretary ambassador for a while there to the French, and blah blah.
Relationship, marriage,
God, what the fuck?
There's a point where you might wonder, how well do I actually know that person? Now you had the chance to kind of go back and excavate as a historian.
No, that's not.
Sounds like
I think what I really always wanted to know was what he was
Diamonds and
as a young man,
Diplomats.
because I was 12 years younger than him, so I didn't know him. Would I have fallen in love with you? I would constantly ask him.
Plain
what were
Jane
you
sort
like
of
when you were young?
reading,
And he said to
simple.
me, I don't know. I was so
It's
busy
just kind of
beating
fun.
him. How do I remember what I was like then?
Yeah.
And he wouldn't talk that much about it. But then when I got these letters and diaries and journals, then I was able to understand it, just as you say, excavate who he was. And I really did like the man that I found. I would have been smitten with him way back then even.
Doris continues to weigh in on American politics then and now. When she refers to an unfinished love story, she also means the one she and her husband had for their country. So how worried are you now? And how worried was Dick, and would he be now?
You know, the interesting thing is one of the things he wrote shortly after we started going through the boxes, he went over to his study And he came back with a little thing he wrote in which he was talking about American history. And he talked about the fact that every change that has come in America has come from the ground up. And somehow those changes made our country better.
Hell yeah!
America is not as fragile as it seems. And I think that was his overwhelming feeling. And I believe it's mine too.
Well, that's more hopeful than a lot of people feel right now. We're stronger than we think.
One of the things about history is that it gives you a sense of perspective and solace and really lessons. All the people I've studied lived through really hard times, so they had the same anxiety we had. But somehow I take solace from thinking those were really, really tough times, maybe even tougher than the time we're living through now. This is a really tough time, however, and somehow we got through. When put to the test, the American people will come through.
Yeah.
I tried to outrun
I'll
grief
drink
in
to
the
that.
months after Dick's death. He writes in an epilogue, one solace, donating their vast collection of books to the local library in Concord, Massachusetts, which created the Goodwin Forum as a community space for reading and public lectures and talks. But the first couple of years, she says, were really hard.
After a while, I realized that by doing the book, I kept his memory alive. Rather than talking only about the grief, I heard his voice. He was back. He was back with me. I think that's what you hope to do when you talk to people. If I have any kind of hope for the book itself, it's that don't wait until the person dies before you go through their memorabilia. Talk to your parents or grandparents and about their memories and whatever their memorabilia they have, because that's the way people live on, through the stories that somebody
Hell yeah!
the next generation.
Goddamn right.
And those stories keep that person alive. So I'd like to believe that I've kept Dick alive. He certainly kept alive for me, and maybe for a lot of people now who will read this, they'll know what a great character he was.
The book is an unfinished love story. Doris Kearns Goodwin, nice to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much.
Letitia Baldridge of Diamonds and Diplomats. Her name just came to me.
And join us back here
Letitia
again tomorrow
Baldridge,
night for more on
Secretary
new
for
White House
JFK.
steps targeting Chinese electric vehicles to protect America.
Explains her life, how she grew up,
And that is the news
how she
hour
got the
for
job,
I'm
what she got to
Rhonda
do,
on behalf
up
of
to the
the
point where
entire
JFK was shot,
Thank you for joining
and
us.
they got the news and all this little kind of inside stuff. And she worked for Tiffany's in New York as well prior to that, so it's interesting. Diamonds and Diplomats. Letitia Baldridge. Check it out.
Are committed
Oh
to
my God.
acting in their clients' best
Oh.
interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage
I'm out of here.
the world awaits.